Thousands rally in Burkina Faso after coup rumors. Full story, ladies and gentlemen. When the dust of uncertainty began to rise over Burkina Faso, when whispers of betrayal and instability circled like vultures over our dreams, the people did not run, they rose. They stood by the thousands, shoulder to shoulder, heart to heart. And today, we don't just tell the story of a rally, we tell the story of a rebirth. So stay with me, because what happened in Burkina Faso is not just news, it's a blueprint for every soul who refuses to bow when freedom is at stake. Ladies and gentlemen, there are moments in the life of a nation when time itself seems to pause and watch, uncertain whether history will take a step forward or fall back into the familiar shadows of fear. The recent events in Burkina Faso did not merely echo through the narrow lanes of Ouagadougou or bounce off the red soil of its countryside. They thundered across the hearts of millions, not just in West Africa but across the entire continent, at a time when the air was thick with uncertainty. When rumors of a coup began to weave panic into the national conversation, something extraordinary happened. The people of Burkina Faso did not scatter. They did not retreat into silence. Instead, they came out in waves, thousands of them, from every walk of life flooding the streets, not with chaos, but with clarity, not with weapons, but with willpower. We witnessed was not a political reaction. It was a cultural revelation. It was the rising voice of a nation long tested by colonial wounds, political games, and economic hardship, now standing on the edge of something new, a united identity. This wasn't just about leadership or governance. This was about dignity. It was about a people who have carried burdens for generations, choosing, this time, not to be carried by fear. And so, in the face of a rumor designed to divide and destabilize, the people chose solidarity. They chose to come together not just physically but spiritually, mentally, and morally. Unity in the face of adversity is not a poetic phrase. It is a discipline. It requires resisting the temptation to act from emotion. It calls for seeing beyond personal survival toward collective future. The people of Burkina Faso didn't wait for a savior. They became their own defenders, not through violence but through presence. In that presence was a loud declaration: we are awake. That unity was not accidental. It was born out of years of struggle, political awakening, and grassroots mobilization. It was the product of young people who asked questions and elders who remembered what freedom once felt like. And when the time came to respond not with panic but with purpose, they showed the world that Burkina Faso is no longer a nation waiting for stability. It is a people demanding it. And what does unity mean in real terms? It means standing beside someone whose language, religion, or tribe may be different from yours, but whose dream for dignity mirrors your own. It means understanding that true strength does not lie in armies or alliances, but in people who trust each other when it matters most. Unity in adversity transforms fear into fuel. It takes confusion and turns it into collective action. It breaks the cycle of manipulation. That's what we saw. Thousands of people stepping into the unknown, not as frightened individuals, but as a force with one voice, one rhythm, one goal: the protection of their homeland, their hope, their future. And let us be clear, this wasn't just about Burkina Faso, this was about Africa. This was a message sent to every capital where power has been kept behind locked doors. It was a reminder that in every village, in every city, there are people ready to rise not because they want power, but because they want peace with justice. And peace is never handed down. It is built from below, from the unity of ordinary citizens refusing to let chaos shape their destiny. What we saw was a living example of that principle. We saw a people reminding their leaders and the world that no decision made in secrecy can compete with the power of a people who are no longer asleep. And that power, the power of unity, is not just reactive, it is deeply proactive. It lays the groundwork for new conversations, new movements, and a new culture of responsibility. When unity becomes a habit, not just a response to crisis, that's when true nation building begins. That's when change becomes irreversible. And that's why this moment matters. Not because it was loud, but because it was aligned. Not because it trended on headlines, but because it awakened hearts. Now, as we reflect on the sheer number of people who showed up, ask yourself this: what does it take to bring thousands into the street, not for food, not for jobs, but for the defense of something intangible yet sacred: sovereignty? The answer lies in the second truth of this unfolding story: the power of the people. Power has always been presented to us in misleading ways. We've been taught that power belongs to those with titles, armies, or international backing, but Burkina Faso just turned that notion on its head. Because in that rally, raw, unfiltered, and unapologetic, we saw where real power lives. It lives in the people, in their willingness to stand up when silence would be safer, in their determination to challenge systems that treat them as spectators, in their own future. When the crowd surged through the streets, it wasn't chaos, it was clarity. It was as if a collective soul had risen from the ground, as if every struggle, every unkept promise, every insult to their intelligence had finally found a voice. It's important to understand this. The people are not just bodies filling space. They are the heartbeat of the nation. And when that heartbeat moves in unison, it can shake foundations. That's what power looks like. Not in isolated protests, but in synchronized defiance. not in blind rage, but in focused determination. Power, real power, is when people stop asking for change and start embodying it. When they stop being afraid of consequence and start becoming the consequence. That's what the rally represented, a living, breathing consequence of years of systemic neglect and external interference. But even more striking was this: no one waited for permission. That's how you know the people understood their role. They didn't ask the elite for direction. They became the direction. They didn't wait for instructions. They gave instructions to each other, to the media, to those who thought the people were still passive. That's the shift. That's the difference between protest and purpose. These were not people begging to be heard. These were people commanding attention. This collective awareness is the scariest thing to any force that seeks to divide, dominate, or deceive. Because when people realize that their strength lies in their unity and their unity lies in their awareness, no rumor, no tactic, no external pressure can override that truth. This moment reminded us that institutions may crumble, but people can rebuild. Leaders may fall, but principles can rise. That's why the rally matters, not just as a reaction to rumors, but as a declaration of a new mindset. A mindset where the people don't wait for change, they become it. And what fuels that mindset even more deeply? It is the recognition that their struggle is not isolated. That's where we move into something even more powerful: the rejection of foreign meddling. Because the people of Burkina Faso are not just reacting to domestic uncertainty. They are pushing back against decades, centuries of invisible hands, manipulating their reality. And they are saying, enough. Foreign influence in Africa has rarely come as friendship. More often it arrives wrapped in promises but tied to contracts. It arrives speaking the language of aid but acting in the logic of control. And when it feels its grip loosening, it often resorts to disinformation, to coups dressed as crises, to economic pressure disguised as partnership. But what we saw in that rally was a mass awareness and unspoken understanding that the game is known. The mask has slipped, and the people are no longer interested in playing along. This rejection is not about closing borders. It's about opening eyes. It's about reclaiming the right to define what progress means without needing validation from those who never wanted you to rise. It's about refusing to let foreign hands pick your leaders, write your policies, or shape your narrative. And most importantly, it's about understanding that sovereignty is not just political, it's psychological. When the people reclaim their minds, no amount of external influence can rule their land. Burkina Faso is showing the world what this looks like in real time. It looks like communities rejecting foreign bases. It looks like youth refusing to be pawns. It looks like mothers saying, "Our children will not die in wars that aren't ours." It looks like a whole nation choosing pride over pressure, vision over manipulation. And let's not confuse this with isolationism. This is about partnership on equal terms, not dominance disguised as diplomacy. When people begin to question the motives behind every foreign handshake, when they demand transparency in every deal, that's when true liberation begins. And that's what the rally expressed: not just resistance, but readiness. Readiness to forge their own path, to pay the price of independence if necessary, to build from within even when the road is longer and harder. This is the moment Africa has been preparing for. A shift not just in who governs, but in who decides what governance means. A shift away from dependence and toward discipline. A shift where the people are no longer passive recipients of history, but the writers of it. And in that writing, every page begins with unity, is inked with people power, and guarded fiercely against external control. Ladies and gentlemen, as the dust of awareness begins to settle across the land, something remarkable is taking shape, not just on the ground, but in the minds of an entire generation. Across Burkina Faso, and indeed across much of the African continent, the youth are no longer observers in the background of history. They are stepping forward as the heartbeat of a new awakening. You can see it in their eyes, fierce, unafraid, unwilling to be manipulated. You can hear it in their chants, not just slogans, but philosophies wrapped in rhythm. You can feel it in their actions, not sporadic or shallow, but grounded, strategic, and fueled by ancestral memory. This is not simply a demographic shift, it is a spiritual return. The youth of Africa are rising not to copy old models of power, but to redefine what power means. In Burkina Faso, when the rumors of a coup began to circulate, it was the young who first sensed the deeper currents. They knew this wasn't just about political instability. It was another attempt to shake their confidence, to drag their dreams back into the shadows. But this generation is different. This generation has read the books their parents were not allowed to read. They have accessed the stories their colonizers tried to erase. They have listened to the pain of their elders and turned it into purpose. They are not looking for permission. They are searching for precision. And in that search, they are finding themselves. This youth does not merely want a seat at the table. They are building a whole new table, one shaped not by dependency, but by dignity, not by fear, but by foresight. And this movement, this rising tide of young minds cannot be bought, bribed, or broken. They are not impressed by titles or uniforms. They are impressed by truth, transparency, and transformative action. They are tired of hearing about the potential of Africa. They are here to fulfill it. And their tools are not limited to protest, signs, or hashtags. Their tools are books, strategies, networks, and a deep inner knowing that Africa's future will not be delivered, it must be built. And they are the builders. The rally in Burkina Faso was filled with these builders. Young women and men standing not just for a leader, but for leadership itself. Ethical, courageous, and African at its core. They stood not because they were told to, but because they understood what's at stake. They are not fighting for survival anymore. They are creating space for revival. This awakening is both personal and political. It demands that the youth unlearn centuries of conditioned inferiority. It demands they see themselves not as citizens of a struggling continent, but as children of a royal legacy. From the empires of Mali and Songhai to the resistance movements of the 20th century, the blood of greatness runs through their veins. But greatness isn't inherited automatically. It must be activated. And what we are witnessing now is that activation in real time, when the youth take their rightful place not just in protests, but in planning, in innovation, in cultural reclamation. They do more than challenge the system. They become the system's replacement. This is why the rally matters. It was not just an act of solidarity. It was a declaration that the future is not waiting for change, it is the change. And when the youth begin to believe in their own power, when they take their dreams as seriously as others take their weapons, they become unstoppable. They become the guardians of a future that has been delayed for too long. And they are doing it with love, with energy, with fire that does not destroy but refines. That fire is visible now, burning through the lies of the past, clearing the space for new truth to rise. But how does a people sustain such energy in the face of overwhelming odds? How do they keep believing when systems seem designed to crush them? That question leads us into one of the most powerful lessons that Burkina Faso has given to the world: faith over fear. Because when fear whispers to retreat, faith roars to rise. In the days when rumors were spreading like wildfire, fear would have been the easiest path. Stay indoors, say nothing, hope it passes. But that is not the language of liberation. That is the silence of submission. The people, instead, chose faith, not blind belief, but active conviction. They believed not just in a person or a party, but in the principle that they are no longer slaves to circumstance. They moved not because they had all the answers, but because they refused to be defined by their questions. Faith is a discipline. It is not the absence of fear, it is the refusal to obey it. In Burkina Faso, thousands chose to walk in faith, with faith that their unity would send a signal, faith that their courage would inspire others, faith that the destiny of their nation is worth defending even when the enemy is invisible. And that kind of faith does not come from speeches or slogans. It comes from history, it comes from memory. It comes from the quiet knowing that our ancestors faced worse and still stood, that our mothers survived hardship and still sang, that our elders planted seeds they never saw bloom so we could harvest something greater. Faith, then, is not abstract. It is deeply African. It is the belief that tomorrow can be better than today, and that we are the ones responsible for making it so. This faith is what allowed the people to rise above manipulation, to look beyond the headlines, to see through the smokescreen. When others were asking, what if things fall apart? The people of Burkina Faso were asking, what if we finally come together? That shift in perspective is not minor, it is monumental, because once a people begin to ask better questions, they begin to live better answers. Fear may try to disguise itself in many forms, in rumors, in division, in threats of instability. But faith reveals the truth behind the mask. And once that truth is seen, it cannot be unseen. That is why fear is losing its grip, not because danger has disappeared, but because people have decided to walk forward regardless. They are not waiting for the path to be safe. They are creating safety through their steps. That is the power of faith in action. It multiplies, it spreads, it builds movements, not monuments. It connects people across regions, ideologies, and generations. And that is how we arrive at a truth even larger than any single nation. Because what we witnessed in Burkina Faso is not a local moment, it is a continental signal. The winds are changing, the ground is shifting, and Africa is stepping into a new chapter. This chapter will not be written in the languages of colonial masters. It will not be dictated by foreign policies or international expectations. It will be sung in native tongues, built with native hands, and guided by native wisdom. A new Africa is rising, not imagined by outsiders, but defined by insiders. An Africa that does not apologize for its ambition. An Africa that does not outsource its dreams. An Africa that no longer waits for a savior but leads itself to salvation. This Africa is not emerging out of nowhere. It is rising from the ashes of betrayal, from the silence of stolen wealth, from the tears of mothers who buried children sent to fight in wars they never understood. It is rising because there are still people who remember. And it is rising because there is a new generation who will not forget. Every rally, every voice, every act of resistance adds a sentence to this new story. And unlike the chapters written by colonizers, this one will be filled with truth, pride, and power. This is the Africa that does not fear the future, because it has already reclaimed the past. It is the Africa where history is no longer a source of shame, but a source of strategy, where every drumbeat is a reminder that we have always had rhythm even when they tried to silence it, where every proverb holds more wisdom than 1,000 reports written by think tanks who never understood the soul of the land. In this new chapter, Africa is not looking outward for answers, it is looking inward for alignment, and that alignment is being seen in real time. Communities are organizing, diasporas are reconnecting, indigenous knowledge is being restored, and across the continent, the myth that Africans cannot lead themselves is crumbling under the weight of reality. The rally in Burkina Faso is not an isolated spark. It is part of a fire that is catching across borders, languages, and regions. It is a fire that does not destroy, it illuminates. It lights up the possibilities that were always there, waiting for belief to breathe life into them. The new Africa is not coming, it is already here. It lives in the classrooms where young minds are questioning everything. It lives in the farms where innovation meets tradition. It lives in the streets where people no longer protest just for attention, but for transformation. It lives in every heartbeat that refuses to settle for survival when destiny demands greatness. This is not a dream, it is a duty. And it is unfolding moment by moment, heartbeat by heartbeat, step by step, led by a people who now know the truth, that the power they were waiting for has always lived inside them.